All right, boys and girls, it is our Friday nightcap, and I have a fantastic group joining me tonight. My old friend Dan Nathan, CEO of Risk Reversal, a CNBC contributor and host of the On the Tape podcast. Mara Escampo, Revolt Black News anchor and managing editor. The one and only Touré, host at The Grio. His new podcast, Being Black, the 80s, is out now. And author, playwright, and screenwriter Paul Rudnick. His new book, Farewell Covington and the Limits of Style, comes out Tuesday. You're all very, very busy. And you know who else is? Joe Biden. President Biden promised to be the bipartisan president. People were laughing at him when he said this and he was running, but he got infrastructure done. He got something done on gun control, and now the debt limit. You're already giving me I'm not that impressed. How do you think he's doing?
I mean, it would be impossible to be bipartisan in 2023. I mean, the Republican Party does not want that. But
my point is, he has been. The infrastructure law got done on a bipartisan basis.
I mean, the Republican Party goes to Washington to destroy government. That is their point. So if we're pretending that they're willing to come to the table and work as good faith actors, that we're not doing the viewers a service, right? Their whole goal is to destroy government. So they're not working with him. It would be impossible. Obama's autobiography was really interesting on this, that he talks about, I thought we could work with them. And fairly late in the process, after we were saying, why is he still trying? He finally realizes, oh, they're not trying to work with us. They're still not trying to work with them.
But the debt ceiling was raised, and it got done with Republicans and Democrats' votes. Like, that's just a fact.
I mean, you know, if they don't do that, then there is no government at all, right? And on the right as we're moving into the 2024 election, we can't have the Republican Party shut down the government.
I'm not saying it's a grand, enormous win, but we can't say that something didn't get done because we've just laid out three things they got done, both parties.
Well, I mean, to Toré's point, we definitely see a lot of principled obstructionism. That's
for sure.
It's not the exception. That's now the rule. But to your point, we have seen some significant victories. We have seen some things happen in the middle, the debt deal, infrastructure, climate. And we've seen that when in Joe Biden's case, not just in a divided Senate, but with real obstacles in his own party, with the Manchin and Sinema. Here's the thing about Joe Biden that we all have to keep in mind. He spent 35 years in the Senate. He has forgotten more about political negotiations than most people will ever know. And so we have seen some evidence of that in these early years.
But he comes from a time when there was actual bipartisanship and you could work across the aisle. It doesn't happen anymore.
Well, it did happen this week.
But also, Biden was elected to lower the temperature and to not be a clown. And he's accomplished that. The other day...
Does he get enough credit for it?
No, but I think it will be somewhat cumulative, especially the uglier the Republicans get. And because DeSantis can only keep jacking things up. So that makes Biden look calm and presidential. Especially when he got off the plane the other day and a reporter asked him, would he pardon Trump? And all he did was laugh. And I thought that was the perfect, most elegantly calibrated response. So I think he will surprise people because Americans like to complain and say, oh, everything used to be better, our lives are miserable. But under Biden, there's been a sanity. And I think that will be very much in his favor.
No matter what he does, is his age going to be a big problem for him in 2024? Earlier this week, he fell. Any of us could fall. But it got wall-to-wall coverage in right-wing media.
Yeah, it will be. I mean, in the general, it will be, right? Because especially if it's not Donald Trump, I think that's really the main point, and I think that's probably the biggest vulnerability right there. But if it's Donald Trump versus Joe Biden, and we're all very familiar with that matchup, it will be much less of an issue. But I guess what I would say is if they're ever on a debate stage, watch out. Remember 2016, it was just a wipeout, right? And Joe Biden, I don't think has the stamina to go toe-to-toe with Donald Trump.
With a liar.
But hold on, you're talking about 2016. We saw Hillary won all those debates, right? The country did not care. Look, anybody who's buying the Sleepy Joe narrative that he's to mention all this wouldn't have never voted for him in the beginning, right? So that's already the Fox News right-wing crazies who are subscribing to that, right? So, I mean, I'm not sure how much this ageism thing, this is a weird thing that we're able to just be ageist against the president and nobody's going, hey, that's ageism. Like, we shouldn't be talking about an older person like that.
Okay, maybe we shouldn't be talking about it, but there are certain things that people think and they feel, and voters think and feel. And if we don't talk about it, it doesn't mean that it's not a concern for people. And it's fair to say that people could look and say, that's the age of my parent who has lost their fastball. Or, Dan, you follow business. Nobody's looking to hire a CEO that's 80. So we could say it's ageist, which it is, and not talk about it. But people are going to talk about it in the privacy of their own home and when they vote. So it's a reality.
But
I'm sorry. Go on.
Well, I also think there are very different priorities when you're 80 versus when you're 30. You know, a 30-year-old cares about things that are very different from someone who's 80. If you're 80, climate may not be that big of a concern because you're not going to be around to deal with any of this. If you're 80, reproductive rights may not be that big of a concern because you're not getting anyone pregnant and your kids probably are out of childbearing years as well. So if we're talking about people's priorities and what you want your leaders to reflect, I don't think it's unreasonable to want our leaders to reflect some of the priorities of people who are raising a family, people who are buying homes, people who are much more in that phase of their life. And we see them underrepresented in government at every level.
Paul?
But I think that the Republican Party, the platform has basically one plank, which is please don't ask us about abortion. And that's going to be a huge win for Biden and for any Democrat running. And I think people have consistently underestimated how powerful that is because it's also now been proven the Republican Party will do anything. You know, once Roe was gone. And I think DeSantis, who's very much, I don't back down, I'm the new sheriff in town, it's only going to get worse. And I think that's going to resonate, that people will say, I almost don't care who the candidate is as long as he's not that.
Especially young people.
Yeah.
One thing that people do care about is the economy, right? People vote on what affects them, not offends them. Unemployment is really low. Inflation has cooled. We did just avert economic disaster this week. How do you feel like we're doing economically?
Well, it's funny what you just said about credit. Is he going to get the credit? Right now, I don't think they're kind of locked into the main argument other than abortion that I think they can win on. If they can avert a recession, and again, this is not in the hands of Congress or the White House or anything like that. It really is the normal course of economic sort of cycles here. And we are due for one. We were due for one prior to the pandemic, right? We threw $5 trillion of monetary and economic, just fiscal stimulus at that problem. We had a mild recession. So right now, it seems like the business world is fixated on when will it come. And that was the one thing about this debt ceiling, that if our debt was downgraded, if we did default, we were most likely going to be in a recession very quickly, and it could have been longer and deeper than a lot of people would hope for. I think the one thing that they have to lean on, Steph, to your point, is 70-year low unemployment here, right? And things are kind of humming along. Wage growth is pretty sturdy here. So if they can get through into this 2024 period and avert a recession, they have to lean into the economy. And it brings me back to 1992.
But I don't know if the messaging is getting through because I don't know that people feel it. Eggs still cost $8 a carton. Box of cereal is $10. Your credit card bills are going up every month by hundreds of dollars because the Fed keeps raising interest rates. The housing market seems frozen because mortgage rates are at sky-high rates. We're all afraid of getting shot by some lunatic with an AR-15 because no place feels safe. So there are a lot of things that people are just feeling that don't feel good, that maybe when it comes to the economy, it's not reflecting the messaging and the reality, but people are not really very enthusiastic.
But we, being the media, are somewhat responsible for that, right? Gas prices is the perfect example. When gas prices are up, like they were last year, every news organization and every reporter was standing in front of a gas station talking about it. When mortgage rates were really low, prices were super high because you could get a really cheap mortgage. And so we instill this fear and unhappiness in people. And one of the reasons prices have been so high is because people are willing to pay those high prices. We keep them inflated. And so we actually are somewhat to blame for the narrative out there. But you're right in the fact that people don't feel good. What about infrastructure? You're Joe Biden. Huge infrastructure package passed. But I remember Mike Bloomberg said years ago, lawmakers don't pass infrastructure because it takes years for voters to see it. And by the time you see it, you're out of office. How does Joe Biden take the win and show America, look what I just did?
I think that part of this conversation, we're acting like he might be able to peel off some potential Trump voters, right? That does not exist, right? They are not coming, right? What he needs to do, what Joe Biden needs to do, is pull out as many Democrats as possible. He gets
and independents.
Yeah, but I don't think that's really the race anymore. If you can pull out lots of Democrats, you can win. If Trump can pull out lots of Republicans, then he can win. I don't think there's really the same purple voter that we're fighting over in Ohio. Ohio's been red several times in a row, right? So I always know a bellwether anymore. Can you pull out, 100,000 black women in Atlanta who didn't come out before? Can Trump pull out whatever voters he can find in that little
But
the
those
red
people
cat,
aren't
the
necessarily
red group?
Democrats or Republicans. Those are people who just don't vote.
Sure. People who are, I am a Republican, but I'm not super excited about, I'm excited about Trump. I wasn't excited about Romney, but I'm excited about Trump. I wasn't excited about Gore, but I'm excited about Hillary, whatever the case may be. That person, that's how you get elected.
Dan?
Listen, it's abortion, it's guns, and it's going to be the economy, and that's it. And where you get those voters for at the end of the day, I do agree so much. Is like people don't feel great about it right now. Unemployment is likely to go up between now and the election at some point.
And we can afford it.
And we can afford it. The savings rate, is higher than it's been in a very long time. So I think the messaging is really important. I think they have to take hold of some of the things that they have accomplished in the economy, and without all of the drama. I used to sit there on CNBC every day. So the Trump economy, that was the Deco every day. It wasn't his economy, right? One of the first things they did was they cut taxes, corporates, right, and large donors by $1 trillion.
Corporates even asked for.
Right. And then you know what happened to that $1 trillion? Corporations bought back $1 trillion worth of their stock over the next 2 years, juicing the stock market. And we make the mistake in the media, like you say, assuming that new record highs in the stock market means that there's a really strong economy. And the underlying, it was not at the end of the day.
But I think the other big factor will be young voters who seem especially eager to vote and to make a difference and be heard and be seen as a bloc that needs to be persuaded and wooed. But they're also better at ground roots organizing. So I think if they are motivated, which I think they may be for Biden, they certainly were during the midterms, that could be an enormous factor because those aren't swing voters. Those are usually Democrats.
I would love for that to be true. Every 4 years, we do the same song. It's young voters, and it usually is.
But guess what? Now abortion is on the table.
Yeah.
And that matters
And
to young
also,
voters.
we are now seeing with Gen Z, and Gen Z, a lot of them are underage for
Yeah, they're
voting.
not
But
voting yet.
no, a lot of them are voting. They go up to 26. So what we saw in the midterms is that there was huge turnout. And we're also seeing that this is the most diverse generation in American history. They're the most accepting and in favor of LGBTQ rights when we're talking about abortion. They're even, more liberal when it comes to economic policy. So I think that is going to, it feels different. It feels a little bit different than what we typically see with young voters because this is such a diverse group and on track to be the most educated in America.
There is a lot more at stake for them, and a lot more of them are engaged than they were in generations past.